Hi, my name is Katie Takianagi, and I'm a fellow of Orton-Gillingham. I have a small tutoring and teacher training practice called Alphabet City Tutors, and I'm based in Brooklyn, New York, but I work with teachers and with families from different parts of the country and sometimes even from different parts of the world. When I talk to teachers who are interested in OG training, a lot of times they have questions, which makes sense because it's a big commitment. It's a big time commitment, financial commitment. So you want to know everything that you're getting yourself into and what your options are. And unfortunately, it's really just not that easy to figure this out from Google searching and even from reading the Orton-Gillingham Academy website or other OG related websites. So I thought if I made this little video that might help to answer some people's initial questions when it comes to the options and the levels for OG training. So first of all, I want to show you some of the details of what's involved in OG training at different levels within the Orton-Gillingham Academy. So I'm a fellow of Orton-Gillingham within the Academy, and all of my trainings follow the guidelines and the requirements of the OGA. So what I have for you here is it's based on a tool that was created by the Orton-Gillingham Academy that's a comparison chart for different levels of training. I've just sort of tweaked it a little bit to add a few updates that have just been made to some of the training and certification requirements. This is me recording in January of 2025, and the OGA just hasn't updated their comparison chart yet. So I have this here to help me talk through it with you. So let's start with the classroom educator level training. As the name suggests, that's really designed for people who are classroom teachers who want to use OG as their gen ed reading approach for just teaching their class to read. Or you might be doing some small group instruction with your classroom educator training. The requirements in terms of additional education that you need, there really aren't education requirements at this level. In terms of coursework, it's 30 hours of coursework with a minimum of 50-hour practicum, or really it's 50 lessons. It doesn't necessarily have to be 50 hours if your lessons aren't a full hour. The length of the practicum, it's a minimum of 8 months, meaning many people start their practicum at the beginning of the school year or close to the beginning of the school year and then run through the end of the school year. And that should give you at least 8 months. There are some situations where someone might not be able to start their practicum very close to the start of the school year. So there is now an accommodation for if you do get started later in the school year, you actually only need at least 5 of those months to be consecutive. So maybe you get started in January, you can teach until the end of the school year, and then you probably have the summer off, and then you can teach a few more months in the fall, and you just have to get up to that 8-month requirement. But it's a minimum. So for some people, if it takes you longer than 8 months, that is okay too. The size of the group that you work with at the classroom educator level, again, it's typically either your full gen ed classroom or it could be a small group. The small group needs to be at least 2 students. So this is not meant for people to be able to work one-on-one with students at this level of classroom educator training. That's really for the associate level and beyond. In terms of the specifications of the sessions themselves, an OG session is 40 to 60 minutes. It needs to happen at least twice a week on non-consecutive days. So if you meet with a student twice a week, with your group or your class, you would have to be doing it Monday, Wednesday, Monday, Thursday, for example. Or if you have the ability to work with your students every day, then obviously you're going to see them on consecutive days. That's okay. But the minimum of twice a week, they need to be on non-consecutive days. So you're not seeing your students 2 days in a row and then not seeing them for 5 days, for example. There are 5 observations that your trainer would spread over the course of your practicum. In terms of application, there may or may not be readings required of you depending on what your instructor, what your fellow decides. There isn't a set reading list for the classroom educator level that's created by the Academy. And you're not required to submit really anything other than some information that you fill out, basically kind of like forms that you fill out on the OGA's online application portal. Your fellow would fill out some questions, and then you have your certification. And at that point, you're considered, in the eyes of the academy, you're considered qualified to work with groups of students, at least a minimum of 2 at a time, in a general education setting. So again, this is really not designed for you to be able to work one-on-one in a really diagnostic and prescriptive way with a student who has dyslexia or who's suspected of having dyslexia. This is more to be able to use the OG approach in a tier 1 or maybe tier 2 setting. So the next level of certification is the associate level. At this level, in order to actually get the certification, you are required by the academy to have at least a bachelor's degree. There are 70 hours of coursework, and depending on who your fellow is or where you get trained, that coursework might be split up in different ways. And then the practicum is a minimum of 100 hours or 100 lessons. So this, again, there's a minimum of 8 months, and for associate level, it's 8 consecutive months. So ideally, people start the practicum close to the beginning of the school year and then complete it at the end of the school year. But depending on the frequency with which you're tutoring or teaching OG over the course of your practicum, it may take you longer than 8 months. That's fine. You just can't squish it into fewer than 8 months, even if you're doing a lot of teaching. At the associate level, you're definitely working with students one-on-one, or it could just be one student one-on-one. But there also is an allowance for, if you're working with a small group, you can do up to 30 of your practicum hours or lessons and up to 3 observations with a small group. And the small group can be 2 or 3 students. That's it in terms of group size, because it still needs to be very small so you can still do that diagnostic and prescriptive teaching. The sessions, just like at the classroom educator level, 40 to 60 minutes, at least twice a week on non-consecutive days. I should also mention that if, for example, especially in a school setting, you might have 30-minute reading blocks 4 or 5 times a week with your students. If that's the case, you can break a lesson up over 2 days, so you end up with a complete 60-minute lesson. It's okay if those happen over 2 days. You have 10 observations over your associate level practicum, or I should say a minimum of 10 observations. It is possible that your fellow or your instructor could determine that you need to have additional observations before you're ready to apply for certification. The application process, there is a reading list for the associate level. Everyone who applies for associate level certification is required to do all the readings on the OGA reading list for the associate level. There's also a profile that you would write for your one-on-one practicum student that's fairly detailed, really describing who that student is as a learner anonymously. You're not giving their information, but so that you're really painting a picture of who the student was that you were working with in your practicum. And then you also submit a trio of lessons that you did with that same student, including the middle lesson being annotated in detail. You're really describing the work that you did with the student to show your skills as a practitioner and your qualifications to actually get the certification. Then your application is traditionally reviewed by the certifying committee within the Orton-Gillingham Academy, 12 fabulous people who volunteer their time to look over these very in-depth and lengthy applications and make sure that they meet the requirements for certification. There also are some accredited training programs and accredited training fellows who actually have the ability given by the academy to serve as the certifying committee for their trainees and to actually be the ones who review the applications and decide on certification. Once you have the certification, you are qualified to work with students one-on-one, with groups of students. You can work in a school setting. You can work outside of school in a private tutoring center or setting, or private practice. You really have a lot of flexibility, and you are considered really qualified to work with students with dyslexia or really with any other reason for needing that reading support. Beyond the associate level is the certified level. So I know there aren't as many people who are necessarily in a position to be looking at certified training, but some people get excited getting into OG training and they're really curious about all the levels. So just so you know, um, again, the certified level requires a bachelor's degree. I know it's a little bit confusing to say someone is certified at the certified level, but that is what that next level of training is called. So the coursework at the certified level is 100 hours. The practicum is 200 hours, and the practicum is extended over a minimum of 2 years. So it is definitely a lengthier process. It is geared towards, again, working with students one-on-one. There is an accommodation for if you work with students in a group too, to potentially use some of that work for your certified practicum. But at this level, you're really working with students at a higher level of language, a higher level of complexity, and particularly focusing on having the skills to teach not just phonology and phonics like at the associate level, but also morphology, more advanced grammar skills, things along those lines. So the requirements in terms of the length of your lessons, the frequency, those don't change from the associate level. You still only have 10 observations, even though it's a 2-year practicum. There is an extensive reading list at the certified level, excellent readings that you're required to do. And you again write a profile for one of your practicum students. And at this level, it needs to be focused on a student who's working at the higher level of language and is perhaps a more complex student than your associate level student. You again submit a lesson trio, including an annotated lesson to really demonstrate your ability to teach at that level. And again, you're either submitting your application to the certifying committee or working with an accredited training program or accredited training fellow who reviews your application in their stead. And then at this point, you're again credentialed to work one-on-one or in groups in a school setting, outside of a school setting. And you're really considered an independent practitioner at this point. So the associate level actually is, you know, a lot at the associate level, but you kind of know what you don't know also, hopefully. So once you get your associate level certification, it's sort of with the understanding that you're still under the supervision of a fellow. So that relationship isn't formally defined, but you will likely have questions, and there are things that you still don't necessarily know at the associate level. And so you will hopefully maintain a relationship with your fellow and be able to reach out and ask those questions. At the certified level, you are really considered independent once you have that certification. Honestly, I'm a fellow and I still ask my fabulous fellows who trained me, I still ask them questions all the time. So I always say that I think of OG as a long-term relationship, and that it's normal that anyone at any level would have questions, but that's a distinction that the Orton-Gillingham Academy makes between associate and certified level. And then there's the fellow level, which is the highest level of certification within the academy and what qualifies you to be able to train teachers in addition to tutoring students at any level. So that's not on our chart, but that's what comes next. I also get a lot of questions about what is different about doing OG training through an Orton-Gillingham Academy trainer versus one of the different companies out there that offers OG trainings, or there are different organizations. I can't really speak very much to what other companies or organizations do, but I can talk a little bit about the Orton-Gillingham Academy since I am an OGA fellow. So we used to be called the Academy of Orton-Gillingham Practitioners and Educators, or AOGPE, which was quite a long name. So now we're the Orton-Gillingham Academy, but really we're the same people we were. The OGA was founded in 1995 by a group of founding fellows, all of whom could trace their training lineage directly back to Orton or Gillingham, which means that anyone who is trained in an OGA training can trace your lineage back to Orton or Gillingham, because we all go back in some way or another to those founding fellows who all go back to Orton and Gillingham. And the Orton-Gillingham Academy is sometimes referred to as the gold standard in terms of OG training. It is definitely a very rigorous training and certification process. So the downside is it's a lot of work. It's really important to be aware of that going into it. But it's really worth it. It's the amount of time that you spend on the coursework, the practicum, all of those observations. The practicum is required as part of the certification process because you just can't learn how to do this work with fidelity without all of that supervised practice and all of that feedback. And even the process of completing the application, it's a lot of work. And so you're really not able to get the certification unless you've gone through that work and you really know what you're doing. The Orton-Gillingham Academy is not a company. It's really an organization. It provides certification. It accredits schools and trainings. It sets the standards and the curriculum for each level of training. It does a lot of amazing work, like hosting a fabulous conference every year, but it's not the same uniform product as if you do a training with a company that is sort of, companies are just sort of run in a different way. We're a collection of individual members. And so many fellows like me have their own teaching practice, or there are also schools and, different accredited training facilities that people can train with. And so, just like Orton-Gillingham instruction is individualized, we all follow the same standards, but we also, we do it in our own way, just sort of according to our own training and our own experience. So that is pretty much what I can tell you about the different options out there. Just that the Orton-Gillingham Academy, it's been around for a long time. It really is directly tied to Orton and Gillingham, and it's hard work, but it's a really meaningful credential because of the work that is required of it. I know you probably still have a lot of questions. I am putting out a video as well that details how I run my Orton-Gillingham, my associate level training, if you want more details about that. But there are other things that you might still be wondering about, and you're welcome to go to my website, www.alphabetcitytutors.com. You are welcome to email me, and I would be happy to talk with you, answer your questions. There are also many other fellows and many other great institutions that offer Orton-Gillingham Academy trainings, but hopefully this gave you just a little bit more of a foundation to start with. Thanks.